you so much for being here with us to talk about the election and to get some perspective from some really amazing people who have different points of view and will give us some great information on some of what happened last week. So thank you all very much for joining us, and we'll get started in I'm going to first introduce our panel for the night. I'm Eileen Dordick. I'm the chair of the Personal PAC Board. Thank you all again for being here, and hopefully the weather will not get in the way of any of our electricity and Wi-Fi connections. So tonight we're going to have a panel including our wonderful president and CEO, Terry Cosgrove, Andy Friedman from the she's a National Reproductive Rights Attorney, and she is a Personal PAC Board member. Nikki Budzinski from Budzinski and Partners, and she's also consultant to Emily's List and a Personal PAC Board member. We have China Dickerson, who's the Men for Choice National Partnerships Director, and Orrin Jacobson, the Men for Choice co-founder and co-ED of Men for Choice and a Personal PAC Board member. So thank you all again, and why don't we start with you, Terry, to tell us specifically about our focus, which is the Springfield legislative session coming up and political issues.
Thank you very much, Eileen, and everyone for being on this Zoom tonight. And first of all, I just want to thank everyone who volunteered at a campaign, who donated critical funds to our work. You know, as we've been moving this pro-choice ball up the mountain for 30 years in the Illinois General Assembly, where, as some of you know, we started out in the 1980s being one of the most anti-choice states in the country, and now we are not at the top yet. We still have some other things to accomplish, but we're getting there, and we've passed, as all of you probably know, 2 historic pieces of legislation, HB 40 and the Reproductive Health Act. I want to start out by just saying that other legislatures around us, like Missouri, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, had all anticipated making great gains in their pro-choice numbers, and in most of those cases among Democrats. And they failed to do so. In several cases, not only did they not make gains, but they lost seats. So Illinois' role in the middle of the country has become more important than ever. We're still looking around for the reasons. And one thing that I did notice in reading, and I think there'll be more information in the next few weeks, but a lot of new voters that came out to vote for Joe Biden simply didn't vote down ballot. In other words, they came out, they voted for Joe Biden, and they left the rest of the ballot blank, and they left, which is what hurt not only us, but it hurt legislative and local candidates, and in a lot of cases, even U.S. Senate candidates around the country, whereas anti-choice right-wing Republican voters were more conscientious about going down the ballot. So that is one explanation for why Biden won, and this so-called blue wave, which was a pro-choice wave, didn't end up materializing the way many of us had hoped. But I'm here to talk about Illinois, and the great news is that every single one of our incumbent senators that was running was reelected, including Belinda Bush, from a conservative district in Lake County, who was the sponsor of the Reproductive Health Act. She was reelected, as was Dave Kaler from Peoria, who represents a district that is not as hospitable to choice as some of the suburban and Cook County districts. So congratulations to every single senator that was reelected, and which makes 100% record of those who voted for the RHA and HB 40 reelected now in 2 election cycles. The news in the House was not quite as good, as we lost 2 pro-choice leaders, incumbents, and that was Diane Pappas from Itasca and Mary Ed Lee Allen from Libertyville. However, we gained at least 2 state rep seats to to make up for that, Janet Yang Rohr from Naperville won, and she defeated an anti-choice incumbent by the name of Grant Worley, and then Suzanne Ness defeated Alan Skillicorn, who was actually the main sponsor of several of the 27 anti-choice bills that are pending in the Illinois General Assembly right now. So those were two great victories for us. There are still tens, if not hundreds of thousands of ballots, mail-in ballots that need to be counted in Lake County and every county. And some of you may have been following the Lauren Underwood race where she was behind by 800 votes on election night. Now she's about 1,000 votes up. So there is a very slim chance that Mariette Lee Allen might be able to pull it out in Lake County, but it doesn't look tremendously good. But there's a race in Rockford that we are involved with. State Rep John Cabello is an anti-choice extremist, and Dave Vella was his opponent that we were supporting, and Dave's margin went down. It's the Rockford area, and Dave's margin went down from 800 to a little over 300 in the last few days. So there is a chance that we could pick up that one, which would give us an extra vote in the Illinois House. So thank you for everyone that made us holding the line and not losing anything and re-electing. When I say that we lost two of our pro-choice leaders in the House that were elected in 2018, the other good news is that we re-elected several of our heroes that came in 2018, including Tara Costa Howard, who defeated for the second time Peter Breen in Glen Ellen. And that is a particularly sweet victory because Peter Breen has probably been the leading person over the last decade trying to enact anti-choice legislation, as well as suing the state over HB 40 and the RHA. And so on to the future, which is what this is about. As most people probably know, our top priority is repealing the Dangerous Parental Notice of Abortion Act, as well as fighting the 27 anti-choice bills that are pending in Springfield still. It's unclear whether there's going to be a veto session or even a lame duck session before the January swearing in of the new General Assembly. But at any rate, we are going to keep working until we repeal P&A. And the final thing I want to say is just as a result of the pending of making Roe completely unrecognizable or overturned by this new Supreme Court. Illinois has a target on its back as the only state in the middle of the country where access to abortion care is reasonable. And so we are keeping a close watch on what the national anti-organizations do in terms of targeting us. For those of us that were around for the Equal Rights Amendment battle, we remember how all the national anti-ERA groups and anti-ERA and right-wing organizations descended on Illinois to stop the ratification. So I kind of have a little PSTD from that era, and thinking that we might be facing that again when it comes to the abortion issue. And then finally, the 2022 election cycle is going to be tremendously important and more critical in terms of protecting reproductive health care in Illinois and the Midwest until 2033, because we are going to have all 177 state House and state Senate districts up for re-election under brand new districts. And when I say all of them, because normally only a third of the Senate is up every election cycle, but every 10 years, the entire 59 Senate legislature is up. And so we will have all 59 districts to deal with this time under new districts, as well as the 118 House districts. In addition, we are going to have all the constitutional offices, including governor, including attorney general. In addition, we are going to have Cook County Board President and all 17 Cook County commissioners all running under redrawn districts. And again, I just want to underscore the importance of Cook County Hospital, because it is the second largest public hospital in the country, and it provides access to reproductive health care. And who the commissioners are and who the president is of the Cook County Board matters a great deal to tens of thousands of women who rely on Cook County Hospital for a wide range of reproductive health care, not the least of which is abortion care. So with that, I want to thank everyone again and move on to our great speakers. I look forward to hearing from all of them because they have a much wider lens on this issue than I do, because as some would say, I am compulsively attentive to Springfield and have blinders on when it comes to so much more. So I anxiously await listening to everyone else, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Terry. And this is a great time to just remind you all that this event is being recorded. And we are going to take questions at the end. So please follow our Sean Tenner's example and put your questions in the chat box. And it gives me a good opportunity to acknowledge the wonderful people who are our terrific allies and champions on this call right now, including Committeeman Sean Tenner, Committeewoman Lauren Beth Gash, Committeewoman Carol Ronan, Katie McFadden from the Sierra Club, Lynn Johnson, our ally from Midwest Access Project, Annie Williams from the Handmaids and She Votes Illinois, and so many other friends and supporters. We really appreciate it. Now we are going to go to our board member, Andy Friedman, who is going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court and the impact that has and is going to have. So thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much, Eileen, and thank you everyone for joining. It is great to see so many familiar, friendly faces. So yes, I have the unenviable task of talking about the status of abortion access and the future or lack thereof of the future of the right to abortion. But what I want to say is it's unfortunately, it's not a question of if, it's sort of a question of when and how. And the question is also not, are they going to overturn Roe, but are they going to overturn Roe, or are they going to just continue to gut Roe? So Roe v. Wade has not lived up to the promise of its potential literally since the time it was enacted, or the time it was decided, I should say, when immediately it was chipped away at with the Hyde Amendment, which many of you know bars abortion coverage if you get your insurance through the government. So if you are low income, you are already being denied access. Fortunately, as Terry mentioned, here in Illinois, we worked hard to pass HB 40, which was a law that allows Illinois to use Medicaid coverage. So people here in Illinois have that, but in most states around the country, if you are low income, you are on your own. So there's already these great financial barriers. There have been many subsequent cases that have further undermined the holdings in Roe. So in many ways, Roe is already very little to many people. If you are someone who already faces systemic economic barriers, you live in a rural place, you can't access care, Roe already is nothing to you. So we all have to start looking past legality to how we are building power, like we're doing here in Illinois, to ensure actual access. The thing I also want to flag here is that the Supreme Court doesn't need to wait to overturn in order to give the signal. So what we're already hearing is that states are going to be passing more restrictions, and the lower courts are going to let them go. In the past, a state passed a crazy restriction. The lawyers for our movement would take them to court and stop them. There's now a sense that those lower courts might not be as quick to stop those restrictions because they know that they have a Supreme Court that is probably going to not take those cases or let those stand. So while many people are thinking, oh, we might have 6 months or a year and a half before we start to see a real impact of this new unfortunate reality of the 6-3 conservative majority in the court, the fact is that we could start seeing it quickly next year as states pass more restrictions, and the courts that in the past have struck them down because they had no other choice, because they knew that the Supreme Court was not going to let them stand, now will feel emboldened. So it's going to be a real problem, these emboldened legislatures, these emboldened courts. Many of you might know, since 2010, we've seen over 450 restrictions on abortion being passed. Terry talked about the states around us, Indiana, Wisconsin, others, all of them passing mandatory delays, forced misinformation, forced ultrasounds, all sorts of barriers, banning telemedicine, which we all know right now during COVID is a perfectly safe, great way to get your health care, banning telemedicine for abortion in 18 states. So there are so many barriers in place now. And of course, overturning Roe would be devastating, but they don't even have to go that far to continue to decimate access. Though unfortunately they may, and we are preparing for what the world would look like in a post-Roe scenario. So on that note, I know people are interested, in what that might look like. There are about 17 cases in the pipeline. You might have heard on social media or otherwise about a case around Mississippi, a 15-week ban that has already in front of the court. The court has so far continued to defer deciding whether it's going to take it or not. It keeps bumping it, and we don't know if it will continue to do so or if it will choose to take that case. There's some, reading the tea leaves. The year after Kavanaugh was nominated and appointed to the court didn't take any major sort of more political cases, give the court a little break, give him time to settle. Will they do that with Amy Coney Barrett or not? We will find out in the next few months as the court decides its docket for the coming spring and summer. Those 17 cases break down generally into about 4 types of categories. One is gestational bans, like the one I just mentioned. That's just bans on abortion based on how far along in pregnancy. 20 is very common based on the false notion that the fetus can feel pain. 15 weeks is also common. 6 weeks is another. This is also based on the supposed idea of a heartbeat. And 6 weeks is long before many people would know they're pregnant, particularly if it's an unintended pregnancy or you're not looking for the signs. Most people would not know they're pregnant. So a 6-week ban is essentially a total ban. Method bans, which means how the abortion is performed. For example, the type of method for performing abortion in the safest way after 12 weeks, which is called D&E, would be banned. So that is essentially a 12-week ban. That is another type of case that's out there in the pipeline. Reason bans, as we call them, banning abortion because of this supposedly because of the intentions of the person having the abortion, such as the sex of the fetus or of the race. These are really crazy. These are cynical ploys. Another one is Down syndrome bans on abortion if the understanding is that the intent is to have an abortion because of a fetal abnormality or because of Down syndrome. So these are the kinds of cases that are playing out. The final one is TRAP laws, targeted regulations of abortion providers. This is something you might have heard of if you were paying attention this past summer to the June case in Louisiana. That was a TRAP law. The TRAP laws are regulations that are put on clinics. They have no medical basis. They just make it more expensive and more difficult to provide the care. They require abortion clinics to be like small hospitals. They have things like how many parking spots, how wide the hallways have to be. The reality is that abortion is incredibly safe. Medication abortion, which is growing in popularity, it's about 40% of abortions overall, 60% of abortions in the first 10 weeks when it's allowed by the FDA. This medication has a better safety profile than aspirin or Tylenol. It is safer than medication you can get over the counter, but of course it's abortion. So instead of being readily available the way medications are that are less safe, it is in fact held under lock and key, and the FDA requires doctors and patients to go through all sorts of hoops to provide and access medication abortion. So again, they're the gestational bans, these method bans, the reason bans, and the TRAP laws. All of them are different strategies by the antis to push care out of reach, to make care more expensive and more difficult, to shame and pressure people who want to access abortion care, and to just ban it completely. And TRAP laws were really the preferred method before, when Roe was slightly more robust, or there was a chance that something like a 6-week ban was necessarily going to get struck down because there was just no way to justify it under Roe. TRAP laws were the death by 1,000 cuts. And while the antis continue to double down on those, they also realize they don't have to hide the ball anymore because they can just pass a ban because they feel they have a friendly Supreme Court, and we'll see that soon. And to just add one more note, least we think that our greatest fear is the court overturning Roe. We should be really clear that for the antis, this is step one. Their real goal is to reinterpret the Constitution to find personhood begins at conception. And they have a friend in Amy Coney Barrett. So we need to start talking about and preparing for the reality that while overturning Roe would be terrible, it's great compared to the personhood vision that they have for our country. So that just shows you how how dire things can really get. So there's a lot of work to do, and we're really fortunate to have Personal PAC here in Illinois as a model for the country, and for, as Terry said, being the haven for access in the Midwest.
Thank you so much, Andy. Really appreciate all that information. Sorry. Can anti-choice states, say Alabama, pass laws in a post-Roe environment banning people from going to pro-choice states? Is that something for, can they ban travel?
So it hasn't actually been litigated, and I'm on the sort of advocacy side of the abortion world, but I would say my instinct is that seems like that would definitely draw a constitutional ban, because there is a right to travel in the Constitution, and that would probably not stand. Take this not as a legal opinion, just as me, speculating. And there are others who are spending a lot of time digging into this question. We will see, and there already is a bill in Congress, things like you can't take a minor across state lines to access an abortion, right? Things that will target people who already are most vulnerable. They will find lots of creative ways to make it very hard for folks to access abortion. Whether or not they could pass a ban traveling like that, I think would be a tougher constitutional hurdle for them to get over.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. And we have more questions coming your way that we will ask you in a minute. Now I want to introduce our wonderful board member, Nikki Baczynski, who's going to talk about national issues and opportunities. Nikki, are you there?
Unmuted now. Okay. I think I got it. Yeah. Well, thank you, Eileen, and thank you, Terry, and thank you to everyone at Personal PAC. I'm very honored to be a Personal PAC board member. I was also very honored to work with Emily's List this cycle in their state and local team. And we were really a sister partner organization in Illinois to Personal PAC. A lot of our endorsements, certainly Emily's List looked to Personal PAC in Illinois for their leadership and guidance on a lot of our endorsements, and we were very much in line on those. But from a national perspective, taking a few steps back to 2016, after the 2016 election, Emily's List had about 60,000 women across the country reach out to them and want to run for office, which is incredibly powerful. And so that's at the federal, state, and local level that Emily's List supports women. I should say, for those that might not be familiar with Emily's List mission, it is to support women exclusively running that are pro-choice. And so those are really the two core criteria. And so after the 2016 election, there was an overwhelming response from women wanting to step up and run for office. After this most recent 2020 election, Emily's List is very proud that at least over 300 of the women that we helped to support ended up running and winning in this election. And what Emily's List does with a lot of the women that are running across the country is we really help them from the very moment that they decide that they're thinking about running. We run training programs on how to build a campaign, how to do messaging. Fundraising is a core piece to Emily's List mission. If you don't know what Emily's List stands for, it's that early money is like yeast. So Emily's List really focuses in on how do we help support our pro-choice women that are running, raise the critical dollars they need to be running at all levels of government. And so we support them throughout their campaigns, and even post-election, we've been reaching out to Maura Hirschauer about just things that they need to be thinking about as Emily's List candidates, since they've now been elected to the General Assembly in her case. So we try to be a resource. From a national perspective, I think I'm not saying anything that folks on this call don't already know. It was a bit of a mixed bag as it relates to the election results. I thought it'd be great for me to highlight, not just Terry did such a wonderful job of talking about the Illinois races, but some of the highlights that really happened across the country for the choice movement that were really critical. Obviously, first and foremost, electing Kamala Harris and Biden. Kamala, from an Emily's List perspective, the first woman, the first Black woman vice president, the first Asian American to be elected vice president. That was truly, someone that is breaking down glass ceilings. this last cycle, which is amazing. I'd also, and I know Terry mentioned Lauren Underwood. We're very optimistic. Lauren was another federal candidate that Emily's List supported. Emily's List was also very supportive of Marie Newman, which was a pickup for the choice community in Illinois, which was a really wonderful thing to see. And some of the other synergies that we had at Emily's List with Personal PAC in particular in Illinois, Terry mentioned Susan Ness, Janet Yang Rohr, but also Kim Fox. We were also very heavily involved in her race and very proud to see that she had a very strong showing on election day. But of course, a few other races that were really landmark. The first African-American woman Emily's List supported that got elected to Congress in the state of Missouri, Cori Bush. That was a landmark election that was very exciting. Danielle Levine Cava became the first woman elected mayor of Miami-Dade, pro-choice woman. For the first time, the majority of congressional delegation in New Mexico is now made up of pro-choice women. In Colorado, there was a ballot measure to actually ban abortion at 22 weeks. It was rejected by voters in Colorado, which was a very good, a successful win. I should say that there are still obviously there are races that are still outstanding. There are approximately 8 congressional races that still haven't been called. 5 of those are potential red to blue pickups for Democrats in Congress. So the makeup, it looks like, of Congress is going to remain pretty close to what it was, maybe a few seats down, but there are still races that are still yet to be called. And I know things look good, as Terry mentioned, with Congresswoman Underwood, very optimistic, but that's one of those 8 races. So we at Emily's List are continuing to monitor those. I'd also want to mention to you that obviously Georgia is going to be incredibly important. I wanted to highlight some of the important policy positions that obviously the Biden-Harris administration is going to be supporting as it relates to the choice community. But critical to making those things happen, like a repeal of the Hyde Amendment, we need to take back the Senate. And so it is incredibly important that the 2 senators that are going, the 2 Senate seats, I should say, that are going to run off, and they're going to run off in Georgia. I'm sure many of you all know, they didn't reach the 50% threshold, avoiding a runoff election on January 7th. So both of those 2 seats are going to be up, and those 2 seats could really shift the majority for Democrats in the United States Senate. And that is critical to ensuring that the damage that the Trump-Pence administration did over these past 4 years as choice advocates, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to overturn and reverse the damage that's been done over these past 4 years. So some of those I would highlight for you are the constant efforts to defund Planned Parenthood that we see at the federal level. Obviously, the Biden-Harris administration will be front and center in rejecting any future moves to try to defund Planned Parenthood. Again, critical to have the Senate. We're maintaining the House, obviously, but important to have that. Also, obviously, the Biden-Harris administration wants to end the Trump administration gag rule on Title X, which is incredibly important. Ending the Hyde and reversing the Hyde Amendment, ending the global gag rule, which is critically important to the international work that the United States does, and making sure that women all across in the world can get access to reproductive health care and their rights to abortion access. So those are incredibly important. Other things that the Trump administration did over these past 4 years is the cuts to the funding of evidence-based comprehensive sex education. These are very important things to, I know, all of us on this call, that the Biden-Harris administration has committed to reversing. But again, I think it's critical that all of us pay close attention as we get closer to this January 7th Georgia runoff. That's going to be important, and encourage everyone to be involved, if you can't just financially supportive of those 2 races. But then I would also just like to echo the work that I did in particular with Emily's List. I just want to lastly echo, this is more at the state level, but the critical work that Personal PAC has been doing in Illinois, and really the Blue Island that sadly Personal personal PAC has really become in the state. A lot of the work that I did with Emily's list was specific, to the states of Missouri, Ohio, Indiana. These are states that we should all recognize. We are very lucky. We have super majorities on the Democratic side here in Illinois, and that is critical to passing things like RHA and critical to what we did with HB 40. The Democrats' pro-choice majorities are in the super minority status in states like Ohio, in states like Missouri. And unfortunately, when I was mentioning, the election only a week ago was a real mixed bag, there was real hope, as Terry mentioned, that we were going to pick up some majorities in the Midwest to start undoing some of the damage, especially as it relates to reproductive health in the Midwest. And sadly, whereas I would have told you in Iowa, we had a really good chance the night before of picking up 9 seats in the Iowa House, at the end of the day, we lost 4 seats. And so what led to that? We really, I think, need to do soul searching as to, was the polling wrong? Clearly the polling was inaccurate, but across the board, there was a lot of split ticket voting. And sadly, folks that were voting for Biden-Harris didn't make it all the way down the ballot as it related to some of our state legislative races and certain local races. So we need to continue the work that we all do that's so important and Personal PAC does moving forward. And Emily's list will look forward to being a good partner with Personal PAC as we were in this last cycle. I guess lastly, I would just say that, beyond these races that are still outstanding in the January 7th runoff, we do have important races now in 2021. Emily's list is going to begin already looking at the Virginia governor's race, the New Jersey governor's race. So the fight continues is my point, and Emily's list is certainly on the front lines fighting for a pro-choice majority across the board and stands ready to work with Personal PAC. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Really appreciate all that insight. I know a lot of people are very interested in, coming off this election, the national picture. So thanks for giving us that. Lastly, we're going to introduce Orrin Jacobson and China Dickerson from Men for Choice, who are going to talk about maybe one of the things that really can make the difference in the future, which is young people and organizing. So go ahead, China and Orrin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me again. My name is China Dickerson. I'm the National Partnerships Director for Men for Choice. I also am the National Political Director for an organization called For Majority, where our focus was to flip state legislatures in Texas, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina this cycle ahead of the redistricting that we all know will take place starting now over the next year or so. While I am young-ish, I think I'll actually be 37 in a couple of weeks. But I think Orrin is going to lead a conversation on that. What I will say though, and a couple of the other speakers tapped a little bit into this, what we are seeing on the state ledge level. I think it's important that as we talk about as important as the presidential race was and is, and our Supreme Court justice, our next Supreme Court justice is, because she's now in, we still have another lever of power, right? We still have state ledge, we still have gubernatorials, we still have mayors, even city councils. There are multiple ways to try to get around and under these sort of trap laws that Andy and others have mentioned. Though it is not the ideal situation to not have a pro-choice elected from the top all the way down the ballot, there are other methods of sort of beating the Republicans off at their tracks as it relates to rolling back reproductive rights. So I want us all to be mindful of that and to explore what are some other methods that we can use in light of our new Supreme Court justice, in light of what they might do at the state ledge levels and state legislatures that are predominantly anti-choice. What are some of the other things that we can do? I know that Terry is well aware of this, and Andy and some of the other board members, a personal PAC. So, I would encourage you all to look to them for resources and for understanding. We have some races happening in Georgia currently that could help the U.S. Senate if we win both of those seats. So my point is that while we had a big win with the presidential election and not so great wins with the state legislatures on Tuesday, that we really need to invest down ballot, continue to do lobbying days and all of these, keeping up with our state legislatures and our elected officials in Congress and otherwise around reproductive rights. Lastly, because I always say this, please let's not forget those who are greatly impacted by a rollback of reproductive rights, which includes women of color, folks in the LGBTQ plus community, our women living in more rural communities, low-income women. Those are the folks the most impacted, the reproductive justice of it all, right? So yeah, I know I may be running over time. Oren, any thoughts on the young folks? Oren is older than me, by the way. Just...
Ooh, that's not nice. That's not nice. Yeah, thanks, China, and thanks everyone for being here. So everyone has been talking for the last few days about the amazing Stacey Abrams, and all of that is justified. And I think the secret to the success of what Stacey has done is that Stacey went out and did something that most of us don't do, and she never stopped doing it, which is she engaged people who aren't part of the process in long-term relational organizing, and she literally built a whole new base of voters inside of Georgia, and that's why we're here. Lauren Beth-Gash, you have flipped an entire area of the state by doing that over the last couple decades. Katie McFadden, you have, and Sierra Club have totally turned the climate movement on its head into one of the most powerful emerging forces in the country, especially with young people, because of that. And so where we may have missed the boat, and certainly can't afford to miss the boat moving forward, is that organizing, in particular deep, extended relational organizing with folks who are not part of the process right now, is critical. And we just tend to show up around October for a massive GOTV push once every 24 months, and then we sort of retrench until the next election. And that is not a particularly effective recipe for success over the long term. I'll speak very specifically about what we're doing at Men for Choice. We have a very, very specific focus based on the name of the organization. You can guess that our focus is on bringing more men into this movement, more male identifying allies off the sidelines into the fight. And moving forward over the next 24 months, our plan is to massively scale up a youth and college-centric fellowship and organizing model. We're going to be launching, we piloted a fellowship program over the summer that was incredibly successful. Just to give you an idea, each of our fellows engaged more than 20 new male identifying allies into the fight. They spent time talking with us in active conversation about abortion access and reproductive freedom and misogyny. They engaged in direct action with our partners. We hosted more than 20 GOTV events, talked to more than 150,000 voters across 6 states, including, I'm proud to say, 50,000 in Georgia alone. Not that we deserve credit for it. I'm just happy that we invested so much time and energy there. And so we're getting ready to scale up this program in large part because of 2 things. Number one, we believe that over the next 24 months in Georgia and Ohio and Florida, we can activate and train 1,000 new young male allies and move them into the movement as direct supporters and partners for the leading organizations in those states to help build more power and capacity, with an eye towards the 2022 cycle, where there will be a new opportunity with new maps to reclaim new seats at the state level and start the process of blocking any more bans from occurring in these states and working towards the possibility of eventually being able to expand rights, which is essentially what had happened in Illinois over the last 30 years. And so the other piece of it, which isn't really about political power, but is just as important, if not more important, is we think it's really critical to engage young men at a point in time in their life where they are sort of forming who they are and sort of defining their identity and their values, and engaging them in a conversation designed to help them change the culture which is responsible for the laws in our country, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is men who are passing laws to rob other people of the right to control their body. It is built on misogyny, it is built on sexism, it is built on racism, and the notion that what I want has any impact on what you should do is pretty ridiculous. And so we think it's critical that these guys understand how important it is for them to be actively pushing back on their peer networks and to building a generation, and I mean this, a generation of men who are prepared to change the culture in their peer group. The fight to protect and expand reproductive freedom nationally, as Andy sort of laid out because of what's going to happen at the court, is certainly going to be a decades-long fight. I think we all sort of understand that. It took 30 years in Illinois to get to this point, which means it's going to take decades to fix some of these problems elsewhere. And so what we are thinking about is how do we go get a group of young men in as many places as possible across this country and prepare them to lead the right way on culture and on direct action as partners to help change the culture which perpetuates the laws and to add power in the field for the organizations that are leading the fight to change the laws themselves.
One of the things I want to emphasize about what Oren said, though, with our men working with Georgia is that similar to Personal PAC, we make sure to work with partners on the ground. We never go into a state just on our own and said, oh, we're going to bring in men to do phone banking and text banking and all of the things. And so we have had great partners in Georgia, including Planned Parenthood, the New Georgia Project, and others, Higher Heights. We did some calls. So there are organizations in all of our states that we partner with in order to do the work and find that we are most effective that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge before we go on to more questions, we have Alderman Michelle Smith on the call. We really appreciate you being here and all your support. And we just had an entrance from one of our pro-choice heroes who just won, and I hope you will turn on your camera for us, Tara Costa Howard, so we can all say congratulations to you. And yay, Tara. Thank you for joining us. We're really proud of you, and we're so glad that you're going to be back in the legislature. So thanks for joining us tonight. Okay, we have some questions that people want to know, and please still keep putting them in the chat box. I'm going to go back to Andy and ask a few things. I know there is a question about the personhood constitutional campaign, and to go along with that, Andy, Annie Williams asked if the Personhood Constitutional Campaign is related to allowing Social Security numbers for unborn babies. And kind of along with that, I know that there are many states that have an automatic ban on abortion if Roe is overturned. So maybe you can address, if Roe isn't overturned, does that just mean that those don't get triggered?
Sure. Yes, and Annie, it's great to have you on here. Thank you so much for all you do. You know, I'm not familiar to a large extent with Social Security numbers in particular, but it wouldn't surprise me. And I will say that there is a web of laws that have been put in place around the country to plant the seed for this personhood concept, like hundreds and hundreds. Often they are hidden by saying that they are to protect the pregnant person. For example, you know, in a criminal situation, if a pregnant person were harmed or murdered, that the person who committed the crime, instead of saying there's a heightened sentence or heightened crime if you harm a pregnant person, they instead make it two separate crimes, one against the pregnant person and one against the baby, the fetus. So there are hundreds of little ways in which the antis have planted the seed of this personhood concept throughout state codes and state laws. And in fact, some of those laws are being used to prosecute women who are miscarrying, or, you know, who have bad pregnancy outcomes, and they're being used to go after those women, even though that was never the intention either of those laws. So it's highly problematic, and it is a very concerted, thoughtful strategy by the antis, as we've seen, as they've done with taking over the courts. This is just in line with that. And so you can find lots of law review articles about it, and you can find lots of spaces in the code. A great organization to look at is National Advocates for Pregnant Women, NAPW. They track these kinds of laws and these kinds of cases where people are prosecuted for their pregnancy outcomes. And they go into a lot more detail about this strategy around personhood and planting the seeds for it. But it is very deep already. They're very far along. And Eileen, on your question about what would happen to trigger laws if Roe were not overturned, I mean, if Roe is just gutted and further gutted and not actually fully overturned, those trigger laws would not go into effect. But those states would instead have to continue doing what they're already doing, which is shutting down all the clinics, right? We already have a number of, 6 or 7 states that are down to 1 clinic. They would continue to make that harder and harder. They also might have a Supreme Court that is amenable to the idea that a state with no abortion clinics as long is okay, right? Terry, did you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I just wanted to say, as someone who has been a student of the right wing for the last 40 years, I spend more time on their websites than I care to admit to. Their ultimate goal is to pass these human life amendments in all 50 states and at the federal level. I mean, they are intent on this, and I think we're going to see more and more ballot measures. I know they've had them in Oregon, they have them in, I think Colorado has had them, but their goal is to pass these constitutional amendments and ballot measures in states and at the federal level that basically says life begins at conception, which would not only outlaw all abortions with no exceptions for a woman's life, a woman's health, or for rape and incest or anything else, but they would also have the impact, which is what they're really looking for, to ban the pill and most configurations of the IUD. So it's been frustrating over the years because I feel like I'm screaming from the mountaintops. This is what they're really about. But as we inch closer with the overturning of Roe is really only the first step. I mean, they are not going to be, over the years, I've tried to tell many people that giving them an inch, like on 24-hour waiting periods or misinformed consent, they are never going to be satisfied. They are never going to stop until they pass these human life amendments at the state and federal level. And I mean, we have to really be clear-eyed about that. And one thing I just want to double back to, one thing I did miss in my summary was Kim Fox. And the reason why this is so important is because Kim is one of 60 prosecutors and attorney generals that signed an open letter saying that when Roe is unrecognizable or is overturned, that they will not prosecute women or doctors for violating the law by either participating in an abortion or receiving an abortion. So I just want to put that out there, that there are other avenues. I mean, it's horrible that we even have to think that it will come to that, but there are people, and our Attorney General Kwame Raoul is one of the AGs that signed that letter too. So they will not prosecute. So that's it, and which kind of adds into what China was saying about local races, because the more and more, I mean, there needs to be a resistance to these horrible laws that are being enacted at the state and federal level. Even if we can't prevent them, there needs to be a resistance. And that's another avenue that I think all of us will be paying attention to and working on.
And Terry, just to add, in addition to banning abortion and contraception, we would also see bans on IVF and other forms of
Right,
assisted
absolutely. IVF is in their target. If you go, and in fact, Amy Coney Barrett, this is one of the things she wants to outlaw. Is
That's what we say now.
She has been open about it, and when people, you know, I know I'm paraphrasing great African American women that say when someone says something and tells you who they are, believe them. We need to believe this woman and what she said. She's made it very clear over and over that IVF and she called the birth control mandate in the ACA is violating religious liberty. I mean, so that's what we're up against.
I'm told that was Maya Angelou from China.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't remember. I almost said Oprah Winfrey, but thank you, China.
Maya Angelou.
They were close. So.
Yes, yeah.
And I want to bring out the point that Lynn Johnson from the Midwest Access Project just wrote in our chat box, which is really, really important. She says, I want to be sure everyone appreciates that policy and legal abortion restrictions that close clinics also close opportunities to train a new generation of providers. The work is so connected, we cannot have the services if we don't have the providers. And with so many of the hospitals being Catholic hospitals where they restrict reproductive services, as the work that Lynn does is to try to get abortion providers and reproductive services providers trained, and it really limits that as well. So I know that's a big challenge across the country, even here in Illinois. So thank you so much, Lynn, for the work you do and for bringing that up. With the last few minutes we have, I want to move to a little bit of, we all want to know what we can do. What can we do now? And as I said at our luncheon, and I mean this deeply, I fear the antis less than I fear complacency. So maybe starting with China and Oren with your organizing. I know a big piece that was missing from this election because of COVID was door knocking and in-person events. How do you think that affected things, and what's our prescription for what people can do?
Listen, I think Democrats, one of the things that we do the best is having conversations with people, particularly in this time where someone say it was a referendum on, racism and sexism and all of the things more than it was about Trump specifically, right? Like he is the manifestation of these things, which is why we saw some drop off, also why we saw some drop off down ballot. Because most people felt like the issues of racism and sexism, all of those cultural things was at the top. And they just need to make sure that we were clear on that as a country, right? So I would say the not being able to have, which is what impacted down ballot races, not being able to have conversations with people. As Oren said, Men for Choice, we did tons of text banking, mostly text banking and phone banking, and organizations kept asking us to come back to do more because we did so much of it. But we really have to figure out, and this was our first cycle of really having to figure it out because of COVID, we really have to figure out how to touch people without necessarily touching them, because Democrats are just good at conversations. And if we're not able to have conversations with folks, it hurts us.
Yeah, I would say, the thing I mentioned earlier, I think is true, which is we are showing up too late. And in this particular election, we couldn't show up at all, right? So the ability to move people from sort of the center, or persuadable or disengaged in, was really hard. And what you saw was a lot of energy at the very top of the ticket because it was so existential. But it was much more complicated everywhere else down the ballot. And so, from my perspective, it's less about what we do in October of 2022 and more about what we do in October of 2021 or in June of 2021 or in June of 2022. One of the things that we did really effectively in the summer of 2018 that led to our GOTV strategies. We were doing lots of community events. We were in communities doing happy hours and hosting gatherings and bringing people together, and then we'd immediately transition them from that event to a day of action. And that was a thing that we lost here. The only other thing I would say is, and this was the lesson of 2016 for me, was that you don't need somebody to be with you on June 1st. You needed them to be with you on November 3rd. And I think a lot of us in the Democratic sort of Hillary side of the aisle started fighting with anybody who was like slow to come over from the Bernie camp. And we turned a lot of people off who should have been with us because we basically were telling people to fall in line in July when we didn't really need them to be with us until November. And so the reason I bring that up is because the beauty of what Stacey Abrams has done is she's not showing up in October and asking people to be with them. She's showing up 6 years ago, building up relationships for 6 years, getting to know people for 6 years and moving them on this path. And so as we sort of start the next cycle, I think we all need to keep in the back of our head, because we are all organizers. If you don't think you're an organizer, just ask yourself whether or not you're having conversations with your friends about politics on a regular basis. And if you are, you're an organizer, is I don't need them to see the world the way I see it at the beginning of the cycle. I need them to see the world close enough to how I see it at the end of the cycle to vote for the candidate that I would like them to vote for, or the issue that I would like to vote for, and keep your options open for as long as possible, and then put in that work.
Thanks, Orrin. And I'm just going to highlight that Tara Costa Howard said that her campaign door knocked beginning the end of August, and she truly believes it made a difference. And we're really grateful you did. And I personally really look forward to getting to go out and door knock again. I'm going to give the last few words to Terry to talk about what we can do for Personal PAC. And before I do that, I'm going to thank our guests today, Nikki Budzinski, Andy Friedman, China Dickerson, or Jacobson, for being with us and talking about the election. And I know we'll make sure you all come back and keep talking, because as Orrin said, we got to keep talking. And next year is kind of a down year, but we're not going to make it a down year. We're going to be engaged all year long. So Terry, can you just wrap up by telling everybody, what we need to do for Personal PAC and with Personal PAC to keep the motivation going through next year?
Thank you. Yes, the first thing we can do is listen to China and Orrin about making sure that we talk to everyone and get everyone involved. I imagine everyone on this call is already on our email list and follows us on social media, but that's really important so we can communicate with you about what is going on in Springfield, what's going on legislatively, politically. So that's the very first thing. If you could find one or two people, have them add their names to the Personal PAC email list, that would be really helpful so we can keep more and more people engaged going forward. And, we're really going to have to educate people about what is in store in the 2022 election. But more importantly, we have to repeal the parental notice of abortion law that currently exists in Illinois, which puts the health and lives of young women at risk and young people at risk. So please stay tuned for what we'll be doing on that, when we'll need people. In fact, if everyone tomorrow could call their state representative and state senator and just say, please repeal parental notice, that would be so helpful, so that people know what's on everyone's mind. And then stay tuned for other actions in Springfield. And of course, everything's up in the air about when the legislature will be in session. It's amazing in how few people know who their state representative and state senator is. So I encourage everyone, you can go to the Personal PAC website and you can put in your address. It'll tell you who your state rep, who your state senator is. Start building a relationship with that person so that, it's about organizing. Make sure they know who you are, you live in the district, what your concerns are. And that would be really important. So we need all of you engaged in this, and we need many more people engaged. And then finally, we are a pro-choice PAC, and one of the things that we do is we spend lots of money to get our pro-choice elected officials elected, and that has really made the difference that we're able to do our entire voter ID project, direct mail, television ads, social media, and that's how we have helped a lot of our pro-choice leaders get elected initially. And of course, Tara Costa Howard's race in 2018 was a barn burner, and we're so glad that we were able to support her again. But it's her and so many other candidates are out there, and I won't go through the whole list. So we always need your financial support. So if you can add us to your end of the year list and keep us in your close with your credit card and your checkbook, that would be great, because we're going to need the help going forward to 2022. There's going to be so much candidate recruitment that's going to go on, because there'll be a lot of people that will be retiring, people that open districts where we're going to need candidates. And I know we've talked a lot about Democrats here, and that certainly with not a single pro-choice Republican in the Illinois General Assembly. I know Marilyn Cohen is on here. Marilyn is one of the people who hired me over 30 years ago. And when in the 1990s, personal PAC, we had 14 pro-choice Republicans in the Illinois House, and many of them were leaders on the issue. We had 7 senators. So under this new map, we're really going to look for Republican primaries where we can play a role and maybe elect some more pro-choice, elect some pro-choice Republicans in 2022, and start to get this issue to be a bipartisan issue again, and not as partisan as it has become, because the anti-choicers and the right-wingers have taken over the Republican Party. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming, spending time with us, listening to our wonderful speakers. We will be back with you in the winter with some more content and information and another meeting like this. So we'll look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.